Hey everyone, it's Melissa, and we are doing our monthly research spotlight today, which has become one of my favorites, and I know many of yours. And there's so much to learn in the research space. And today we are very fortunate to have Molly Sherwood here with us from the Allo Hope Foundation. And Molly has been involved in research for many years and is now the director of research at Allo Hope Foundation. But there are so many different types of research, and one of them that is near and dear to my heart, and I know near and dear to Molly's heart, is patient-centered research. And so we're going to talk about that today. But first, I just want to start and welcome you, Molly, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to see you virtually after having seen you in person a few months ago.
Yes, very, very nice to see you too. Well, thank you. No, we're so happy to have you here. And I just want you to kind of start with telling everybody about how you got into the research world professionally and about the types of research you were involved in prior to the establishment of Allo Hope Foundation and getting involved with them. Because you've had quite a career.
Well, I wasn't always doing patient-centered research, but I was since college doing some type of research. I had a biology degree and I did my honors thesis, just undergrad, on sort of studying the process of evolution through examining yeast in a lab. So I did that. I
Oh,
used to work in
wow.
because yeast has like a super short life cycle. And so it can reproduce many, 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 many generations. So you can watch how
Wow.
evolution occurs in a very tiny organism that evolves way faster than humans do. So I started off in the lab
Sure.
there. I also did some research in a neurobiology lab with mice in Baltimore. After I graduated with my biology degree, I started working at a preclinical contract research organization, which is a fancy way of saying that it's a research center that pharma companies will pay to help do some of their studies in order to get drugs submitted to the FDA for approval. And I did that for a couple years, and then I transitioned into this awesome job with a research consulting firm for some
Oh,
reason. I
wow.
don't really know what they saw in me because I have a bachelor's degree and I was like much, much younger than my new colleagues who all had MDs and PhDs. But thank gosh
Wow.
that was so lucky. I'm so grateful for
That's
that.
awesome.
I mean, mentorship and watching people,
Absolutely.
it's so helpful. And so that's one of the perks too of being in consulting is you get to do a ton of different things. So, usually it would be like biotechs or pharma companies hiring us to study any number of things, like, studying whether the way a drug is packaged would improve a patient's adherence to taking a drug, or doing a giant literature review to find out um, anything about why people choose to start and stop taking certain medications, or big database studies of electronic health record data to find out prescribing patterns or why people might have certain conditions if they have other things going on in their health histories, or designing big clinical programs to go to the FDA. And so I got to learn and do a little bit of everything. Um, and that's how I sort of began and grew my time as a researcher.
Nice. Very, very, very nice. And, you know, having this background, it's so interesting that you you've seen research. I mean, when you're in the lab, that's like you can't get much more um up front, up close with the research process, but also being on that side as well on the consultancy side gives you a an even different view.
Yeah.
How did all of that, combining such an interesting path, kind of lead you to becoming the director of research at Allo Hope?
Well, I, I it almost feels like it was just a path that unfolded for me. Thank
Mm.
gosh, because I became a patient myself. I was diagnosed with a rare pregnancy condition called red cell alloimmunization. And I know that you interviewed my colleague and very dear friend Katie a little bit ago, and
Yes, wonderful.
she shared about her condition, which I share with her as well. And the short of it is basically that sometimes you can develop antibodies in your blood that can cross the placenta when you're pregnant and attack your baby's blood, and they can become very, very sick and potentially die if they don't get the right care. And so when I was navigating that in my pregnancy is, first of all, let me say I'm a very lucky case that I have three healthy children at home. So
Mm,
I just count my blessings every day for them. But during that
sure.
process, I was like trying to research, of course, because I'm a researcher.
Of
So I'm
course,
like,
you're a researcher. Yeah, exactly. Of
I'm
course
like,
you
let
did.
me learn everything about my disease. Well, there really wasn't much. I mean, so I
Mm,
learned more from the patient support group that the Allo Hope Foundation ran. I
wow.
mean, I learned more from those patients. And so I really became grateful and entrenched in that community. And so it became possible for me to transition to being the director of research for the Allo Hope Foundation. And I'm so grateful every day.
And we are so grateful for all the amazing work that you're doing with Allo Hope. And I think, research is such a big part of that. And we need research to support patients across the board, but really just in conditions like alloimmunization, where there's not as much known and more is known over time, research is so key. So, you know, for you, kind of, how would you define patient-centered research, which has been something that has been a part of your work there?
I think I would define it as any research initiative that consults with patients for every phase of its development. And I think that
Uh,
that's my personal definition. I think
It's a great
some.
definition.
Okay, so you agree with that one. Okay. Are
I
we
agree
ready?
with that one because yes, because it's interesting because Molly and I met through um mutual connections in a patient centered a company that is patient centered and that I used to work for, and that is very much the case. And I wasn't as familiar myself at the time with patient centered research. You really do. You have patients are their influences, their thoughts, their insights are part of the development of every phase of the study. And that's what makes the study so great.
That's how it should be. And I think it's happening more and more. And I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
the Patient Centered Outcomes Research Institute has great resources
Yeah.
about what this really
Yes.
entails, as you know. And they
Yes.
talk about sort of like the uh, different levels of including patients in
Hmm.
research. And
Yes.
so it's it's great to do it in any way, of course. If you can include
Yes.
patients, awesome, but sort of the
Yeah.
entry way of doing this is sort of like doing a focus group, having patients join for one phase of what you're doing, which is great. I'm glad when that happens always. But
Yeah.
really, the
Yeah.
pinnacle of like what
Absolutely.
we should be looking for
Yeah.
is patient collaboration
Yeah.
all along the way. And ideally, patients as a shared leader when we're actually conducting research, where it's
Yes.
like a patient next to a clinician, researcher, whoever it is, together.
Yes.
That's like the dream, you know?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And this is so important for our generation in particular because we're very active in our own healthcare. We're very much whether people are in the advocacy area, we're just trying to find as you were trying to find information to help us navigate our healthcare because the healthcare system is very complex and it isn't always so friendly
Mm-hmm.
to put it that way to people in our age group, and it can be challenging to navigate with all the other responsibilities we have on our plate. And so this idea of having another avenue for us to be involved in, we can be involved as advocates in trying to change things within, the day to day of healthcare or advocating for our own health, specifically when we go to appointments. But this is another avenue which everyone is really looking for, where we can make that difference. From a research perspective, for you, what makes this particular type of research so unique and so valuable?
Well, it's really interesting that I now reflect back on this in my previous work in consulting. And
Mm,
I was there for like 8-ish years, and never once did I
Mm.
actually encounter a patient affected by a condition that I was helping to do a study on. Never once did a client say, "Oh,
Wow.
I talked to this patient advocacy organization," or the patients say they're looking for, never one time, which I'm not trying to blame anybody, but I think it's very rapidly evolving to include patients more. But when you think about it, that is pretty
Yeah.
weird that you're designing whole clinical trials to try to figure out, if a drug or an intervention is working and it's going to be tolerated and liked by the target population. Like,
Yeah.
I'll give an example. Say we were designing a study on the
Yeah.
effectiveness of like a psoriasis medication. And maybe the pharma
Sure.
company and the research firm will decide that the main endpoint, like the thing we're going to use to measure if this works, is going to be,
Hmm.
resolution of visual symptoms in 30 days. But what if I asked a
Hmm.
patient and they said, "I don't care about the visual symptoms. I care about how itchy I am. And also my symptoms usually take months to resolve, not 30 days." Like that's the information that
Yeah.
I need to do a good study. And so that's also like, there's also sort of this antiquated way of why it has been stuck that way, where when you design a
Mm.
study, you're supposed to choose your measures, choose your inclusion criteria based on historical studies that have already been done. So you have
Mhm.
like a predecessor to build on, right? But that actually
Yeah.
ends up
Yeah.
self-selecting for just like continuing to do things the old way and not asking patients
Yeah.
still.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. And I
Yeah.
do think that it's getting better. FDA has patient
Yeah.
advisory panels now and all these things.
Yes.
But patient centered research is so valuable because we can ask
Yeah.
patients, "Hey, what affects your day to day life about this condition? And if you had something to treat your condition, what would you want it to do? And what side effects would make you stop? And what do people need most as a treatment? What's keeping people from getting the care they want?" That, if we had
Yeah.
the answer, then we could design something perfectly to answer that question in a way that's
Yeah.
useful.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Excellent, excellent points. And for our, fellow millennials and beyond millennial age, because we have many members in our community who come to us who are which we greatly appreciate, who are Gen X, and beyond. Those who are not in the research world for a living, but rather are really proactive about their health and the health of their loved ones, are simply interested in learning about different areas of health. Kind of why would you say patient-centered research is something they should have on their radar?
Well, I think first of all, they need to know and believe that they have the capacity to understand research. Even if they don't
Yes.
have a background in science or statistics, they can start reading published articles that are in medical journals. A lot of them are free, not all, but a lot.
Yeah, but a lot
So,
are. Yeah.
yeah, they should start researching and searching for things they're interested in on Google Scholar instead of Google. That way, you actually see the
Yes.
studies and they can practice reading them and they'll start to get very good at discerning how are these laid out, what's the structure these usually are, what do people usually look for when they're doing these things. Because to your point, our generation is really interested in like taking things on for ourselves, speaking for ourselves, digging on our own.
Yes.
That's like totally setting up for engaging and being aware of patient centered research. And I think that that's the future of medicine. Patients have access to their own charts now. Good clinicians have the humility to understand that while they manage sometimes hundreds of conditions, their patient is managing their one condition and they're doing all the research and totally obsessing over it. And so, working together, that is the future of research in medicine.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And it's very exciting that that is the future that we're looking at for sure.
Yeah.
So, how can you become involved in patient-centered research if you're interested in doing that?
Well, first, I feel like I want to motivate people to feel encouraged by research because I think sometimes people think of research as something that happens far away in like the ivory tower of academia and it never trickles down into real life, which is fair because historically, that is true in some cases.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
well-designed patient research can be implemented more easily because the patients are saying, here's what I want. Here's what's going to work for me. Here's what's going to make me want to do this thing. And if we design it with patients along the way, then also while the research is being done, it is being done in service to patients, even before it's officially, closed and deployed and published. It can be of service all the way along. So to be involved, I think first, like we said, read research. In order to be the
Yeah.
best advocate, you need to be able to understand sort of the parameters that researchers have to work around, like how to design an outcome so that it's measurable in a way that's useful to people who need to do the analysis on it, just things like that. And, understanding that businesses are funding this and how do we do this in a way
Yes.
that's effective for everybody. And I think just looking up other resources to figure out what type of research is going on. Like we talked about the Patient Centered Outcomes Research Institute, looking and seeing what they've funded, what initiatives are going on. If you have a passion in health or a certain condition, look for patient advocacy organizations that represent that condition because they're probably involved in roundtable discussions and public conversations about engaging patients. And then also, if you're interested in participating in clinical trials as a patient, you can just search them yourself on clintrials.gov. It's very searchable. It's publicly available. You can look pretty easily.
Yeah, no, great, excellent points and information for people to have. And an excellent example of the importance of patient-centered research is in improving lives of patients can be seen at Allo Hope and work with Allo Hope Foundation. So tell us kind of about some of the patient-centered research you have spearheaded in relation to alloimmunization and in your role at Allo Hope Foundation.
Well, we've done some really cool stuff and we're going to do more, I hope. Well, I know we will. It's in the future, but we've done some survey studies of women in our support group who have my condition, alloimmunization, and asked
Mhm.
them kind of comprehensively, start to finish, how were their pregnancies monitored? What happened in those pregnancies? What kinds of
Mm.
treatments they received? How were they personally affected in terms of quality of life, mental health? And this is huge because it tells the story of a real diverse sample of women receiving care across the country, which, something that people should consider, which is sort of a necessary, it just happens. It's not really terribly avoidable. But when a really awesome research institution publishes a study in their patient base, that is, you're
Mhm.
seeing outcomes that are done at a really awesome research institution. And so that doesn't necessarily represent the truth of what patients experience across the country or across the world. And so
Absolutely.
being able to do survey studies, regardless of
Yeah.
where they received care, is a great portrait of the reality of a disease. And we also just finished up a project supported by PCORI that we mentioned earlier, where we brought a bunch of patients and clinicians and researchers and industry leaders together to talk about our needs. And we were able to use that to create a long-term patient-centered research plan for the Allo Hope Foundation. And part of that plan was that we really wanted to make new clinical guidelines for the management of our disease because they're very sparse, the ones that exist, and they're not protective of the women and children affected. And so I am so happy to
Mm.
share that we were able to partner with a pediatric clinical care doctor, sorry, with a pediatric critical care doc
Mm.
who we love, Dr. Phil Spinella, and myself and our executive director co-chaired. Again, there's the shared leadership we're talking about with patient-centered
Right,
research.
exactly.
Co-chaired, yes, that's the dream, a consensus guideline conference.
Yeah.
And we created new guidelines, brought together like more than 40 clinical experts, put together new
Wow.
guidelines to manage, and it's going to be published. And I can tell you truly that of the hundreds of babies that I have seen die of
Mhm.
our disease, almost all of them would be alive if their care teams had followed
Mm.
these guidelines. And so that
Wow.
is what shared leadership can do, you know?
No, that's absolutely wonderful and incredibly exciting and just, I mean, just a wonderful example that illustrates this value of being involved as a patient
Yes.
in the research process and what it can do for your care and for the care of other people who are experiencing and will experience what you've been through and help improve their experience from what you had. You know, for people who are in their 20s and 30s and early 40s, and a lot of that age group is part of your population in particular of childbearing age. Um, why would you say people in this age group are uniquely suited to both participate in and conduct patient-centered research?
Well, one reason actually you made me think of just now talking about how valuable it is because you're helping other people. And I think that that is
Yeah.
something that our generation cares about a lot. And I think that can be very
Yes.
motivating to know that you can contribute to something not just for you, but for other people too. So I think that's something our generation really cares about. And I think that we also have this unique ability to really lean into technology, learn how to search for things, learn how to judge what's quality evidence and what's not, how to use social media. It's really setting us up to find resources and then jump in and be a part of research too. And another thing that I'm sure you encounter in your work, and I do all the time too, is that someone who's passionate about their condition or their health is a force. Those people, you can tell when you're listening to somebody talk who's doing something because they're passionate. And so, anybody who feels
Absolutely.
passionately about a topic in health, they're going to be propelled forward by their passion.
Absolutely. Beautifully said. That is so, so true. And I think we kind of feed off one another's energy. And
Yeah.
I know this is the case for us, but for so many others I've met, who, whether they're in the research space or in the advocacy space, we inspire one another because the challenges are there. The work is hard and it's a marathon, we all know, not a sprint, but such an important marathon. And we keep progressing, every single year in lots of different ways. And lastly, just I'm wondering as we move forward because none of us unfortunately are going to get any younger, which many millennials are starting to realize, especially once they hit 30 and beyond. They don't want to talk
It's so
about it.
true.
None of us want to talk about it, but it's true. Isn't it true? Everybody's like, you'll say like, oh, you have 20 years of research experience, whatever, and they'll be like, but you make me sound so old. And you're like, oh my gosh, I actually have been doing this a long time. But, kind of for us is as millennials, as we age into the 30s, into the 40s, we eye that other number that we don't even want to talk about yet. We have much respect for all those Gen Xers, but we're not there yet. You know, what makes patient-centered research for, cutting edge, something that we should have our eyes on as we work on each of our own, respective goals to stay healthy as we age?
I think understanding that we have a role in our health just as much as our clinician, our healthcare provider does, that's an important realization to have. And we age, life evolves. Having a fundamental belief that we are a partner in this, I think, is really going to serve us well in our health. And so it's a mentality we should be adopting now and carry it through indefinitely, you know? And I think when we begin to read research or we begin to consider, starting a treatment, changing a habit, taking a medication, we should be looking for research or reports or interviews with actual patients, with actual patient feedback. And if we start
Yeah.
expecting to see that as a norm and as a criteria in which we judge something to make our own healthcare decisions, this patient centered concept will become the new standard as we age, which is something we should all hope to see.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think, we are always, I think, looking for the tools, not only to manage whatever we are currently managing, but we're looking ahead. We're all trying to stay, I think as a generation, we want to stay as healthy as we can, as
Mhm.
long as we can. And so this is one of the greatest ways to be able to do that. And I think talking with someone like yourself, Molly, just makes you realize how accessible this really is to
Yeah.
us, and something that we need to participate in and we need to actively use and be looking for. So I greatly appreciate you taking the time. This has been an amazing conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much for letting me nerd out about this.
Yeah. It is my pleasure. Oh my gosh, I am so thrilled, and we want, with Why My Health, we want to bring people um, to, as much knowledge as we can across the board. But when it comes to research, this is an area that where um, millennials, we can be innovative. Allo Hope is, extremely innovative, and Why My Health, we are always looking at new ways of bringing things to people and bringing them things that they're not familiar with. And so I'm really hopeful that as listeners tune into this, more people will learn about patient-centered research for the first time, and others who have heard of it may not know all the intricacies that you were talking about and how they can be involved. Because I think that's something that people are often looking for, is how can I get involved? And so this really provides a path to that, in multiple regards. So this is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.